Hey, I'm John Wilcox, Roper School class of 2003, and I'm currently a freelance illustrator and graphic designer.
Jeremy Shem, Roper City and Country School class of 1992. So I want to go back to your time as a student at Roper.
Sure.
And obviously you were involved in art back then, probably. Was that your main focus?
Yeah, art was definitely the main focus for me. Ever since I can remember, I've been doodling ever since I was little. It was always something I thought, I want to do this someday. And that was about as far as I ever thought about it for the most part. I started at Roper in high school, so ninth grade. And then I just went there for high school. Although I did also go to Roper Summer Camp, a couple summers before that. So I was familiar with Roper. I actually had an aunt who went to Roper when she was younger. So we were familiar with it. But I think my mom really wanted me to get in there because she was impressed by the school overall, the academics, and knew that, she figured it would probably be a good place to foster artistic creativity and stuff like that, yeah.
Were you into sports, or were there any subjects that you were really into, or was art your main thing?
I was not into sports at all. That remains pretty much true to this day.
I see a lot of motion in your art, and I just wonder where, where that comes from.
I've never thought about that before. I guess
it's very dynamic and...
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that before. I guess if I had to put something to that, it would be probably just that I'm also interested in animation. So even though I personally like to draw still images for the most part, I think there's probably a lot of influence in movement and animation and in what I draw. But no, wasn't into sports. I only did one theater production, but I was pretty into that. It was Godspell.
As an actor, or?
Yeah, actor, singing, stuff like that.
And music, were you into music back then too, or is that something that you kind of do later?
I've always kind of been into music. I grew up in a church choir and stuff like that, and played, I played clarinet in my band before I went to Roper in a school band. And my friends and family are all pretty musical, so I was always around that, but it wasn't something I was very serious about back then.
So I want to talk about the Rough Rider mural in the gym. Did you do that when you were a student, or did you come back and do that later? Tell me, what's the story of that?
I did that as a student. Somehow people knew that I made art, and I don't think I'd ever really painted a mural before or done anything that big. So it was fun to, figure out how to project it and all that kind of stuff. But then I was this is just drawing on a big wall, so that's fun. And I think I did it over a couple sessions, in a week whenever I had a free period or something, or maybe I stayed after a little bit to do it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. A little more background about that piece, some behind the scenes info, was that at my class's senior prank, one of my classmates, quote unquote, defaced that mural and painted a flower on the end of the sword, which I actually kind of liked, but they wanted to change it back, so that happened.
I like that. So then out of school, did you go to college, or how did you continue on your journey?
Yeah, I went to Columbia College in Chicago and specifically studied illustration. I wasn't a terrible student, but I just didn't really apply myself too much. The only AP class I took was art history, and that was mostly because Pat Lawrence was my favorite teacher, and I liked all of her classes. But I wasn't super into the college search. I applied to U of M and some other schools, but I was I don't really know what I'm going to do. And then my friend Bruno Tisch, class of 03, was already set on going to Columbia for film. And so he was telling me all about it. He's like, you got to apply. You should come here with me. So that's what I did. And I got in and went there for 4 years. Lived in Chicago.
Out of college, did you come back here?
Yeah, after college, I had been dating my girlfriend, now wife, who also went to Roper, Erin Milbeck Wilcox, class of 04. She went to Kalamazoo College, so we would take Amtrak trains back and forth and visit each other all the time. And then since I graduated a year before her, after I graduated, I couldn't really afford to stay in Chicago on my own. And so I just moved in with her in Kalamazoo for a year.
Were you working as an artist at that point?
I was freelancing. I'll say freelancing, and I'm doing air quotes right now.
Right.
Because I didn't know what I was doing. And I was kind of getting some work, but I was it was very cheap to live in Kalamazoo, so I didn't really, whatever. And I worked at a Barnes & Noble for a bit and did side jobs and whatever. But yeah.
So illustration or graphic design or both? Or?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, illustration is like my first love and the thing I like doing the most. But I also have a lot of experience and some training in like graphic design and web design and print design and like branding, logo design, all that kind of stuff. So that was always easier for me to find paid work in. So yeah, like I would be doing a website for somebody or a logo for somebody or whatever while I was trying to like draw comics and figure out what drawing actually meant.
So we talked about the Rough Rider mural. Tell me about some of the other art that you've created for Roper.
When I was going to school at Roper, it was when they were building out the stuff at the lower campus.
The Stewart Building and the CCB.
Yeah, all that stuff over there. And they wanted like some kind of little drawing mock-ups of like what the space could look like before it was built. So they asked me to do like a couple illustrations of that. So that was like a cool thing where somebody actually wanted me to do a thing. But yeah, so it was that, then the mural. That's what I did when I was at school. And then a couple years ago now, I don't know what time is anymore in this
it's been
COVID
weird.
world,
Yeah,
but I think it was a couple years ago. I was asked to do the logo for the Legacy Society. Danita Banks-Sims asked me to do that, and it's always fun working with her. And we ended up making a logo that is very hand-drawn, like my style kind of thing. Maybe even looks a little bit like childish in some ways. But people at Roper, I guess, felt that that was a cool representation of like the breadth of the education and starting when you're a kid and getting to this point where even way after you go to Roper, maybe you want to like give back and be in the Legacy Society. So they felt like it had a good connection to like the past and the future and the present and all this stuff. And it depicts, the different buildings of the campus, which obviously it's nice to have all those in one image. So
yeah, they're iconic, at least in my mind, those three things that you've incorporated into the logo.
Yeah. So that was a really fun one. And then last year, they approached me again to do a different project. So we basically created a online, public-facing digital archive of all the materials they've been collecting and putting together for a long time, which is very cool to have all that stuff available now. So yeah, we created a website that is like pretty accessible and hopefully easy to use.
What do you want people to learn about the school or take away from your art that features the school?
I feel like the work I've been doing for the school recently is like very much about the school. So in some ways, I feel like that's just kind of inherently there. The website obviously is just like tons of information about the school, but I guess we did want to make sure that the way that we created the site and the visual style of it was like very open and accessible and just like easy for everyone to access and use. So really putting like the content forward and kind of letting all of those documents speak for themselves and like tell the story of the school. We wanted to make sure the design took a back seat so that the content and the message of the school could really shine through. And I think in some small way, that's kind of like my approach with the logo too, right? It's depictions of those iconic buildings. Obviously the brand colors, it's all consistent with everything else Roper. So hopefully when you see it, you think, Roper, school, they have these different buildings. They're kind of quirky, all that kind of stuff.
What parts of the school do you bring from your time at Roper into your work?
Well, I guess I'll say personally, I find one of the many messages of the school that kind of like has stuck with me is the idea of like being a lifelong learner. So I'm always like getting into learning new techniques, new software, new tools, new whatever. I'm like always on the hunt for like different ways that I can work. And not just in art, but like all sorts of different stuff. So I love to learn. And that's, I think, been a big important thing for me in all the things that I do, especially working for myself and like having to figure all that stuff out. Being able to feel like independent and that I can figure stuff out and that I can do what I want to do is like really important. And I think that's stuff that comes from the school in some ways. But in terms of the actual work, I mean, I had fun when I was at Roper, and I had I made a lot of good connections that I still have, a lot of friends. So I try and bring some of that energy in with like the fun and just like, I love to draw people and people doing stuff and making connections like that. Also in a lot of the work, I mean, it makes sense, but I also just like to do it like making stuff look very diverse in terms of all different types of people that I bring into it. So that's important.
Let's get into your creative process a little bit. Do you like to work by yourself? Do you work quickly? Do you, shut yourself into a room for 8 hours or 24 hours? Or what's your process like?
My process is that I'm a huge procrastinator, But, and maybe this is just me making excuses for my procrastination, but more recently I've been like, well, I think when I'm procrastinating, I am thinking through this stuff. So that by the time I get through the procrastination and actually sit down and do the thing, I've already got a pretty fleshed out idea of what I want to make. I know my own limitations. I'm working within that. The process, it really depends on like what kind of project I'm doing. So if it's like a logo, it's going to be different from, if it's a website, it's going to be different from if it's like an editorial illustration for a magazine. I do work pretty quickly. For a while, I'll just have a little sidebar for a sec. For like 4 years, I was in DC, and I was a creative director at a firm downtown, like an agency communications firm. Mm-hmm. And we did lots of websites, infographics, logos, like all that kind of stuff, and print design. And it was real fast paced. So I just had to like jump into a project and like have an idea ready to go. And that took a little bit of getting used to, but I found that I was like pretty good at it. And now that I'm freelancing full time, I can like bring that into my work. And I've found that's like a real asset that not all other designers, illustrators have. So I still try and do a lot of like sketches and exploratory stuff up front to try and like make sure that what I'm making is the right thing to make. But a lot of times I do feel like I have an idea and I just kind of jump into it. You know, it changes a little bit as I go, but usually I find my instincts are pretty good.
One of my favorite quotes is from Chuck Close, and he says that he always thought that inspiration was for amateurs, and the rest of us just get to work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like that quote. And there's a bunch of other people that say similar things. You know, it's like you gotta show up, you gotta put in the work. It's not about inspiration or like whatever, any of that stuff. And I think about that a lot, especially with the procrastination, because I'm like, I just have to sit down and do it. And I know there's always that initial hump you got to get over when you're sitting down to like a blank page or a blank screen or whatever it is. And it's like, you have some vague idea of what the thing should look like at the end, but it's like, how do I get there? And so usually it's hard to jump in. And then even once I do jump in, there's a long period of time where I'm like, this looks bad. I don't think this is going to look good. And then you stick with it. And then at some point it starts to come together, and that's when it feels good. And I'm like, right, this is why I'm doing this. I like this part.
Before I was saying, I notice a lot of your artwork is very bold and dynamic, and there's a lot of motion. And then you also have some pieces like Journal of a Shut-In. Mm-hmm. So there's outward energy in a lot of the stuff, but then there's also that side, which seems more, introverted and whatever. Sure. Can you kind of talk about how you work kind of both of those things into your art?
Yeah, for sure. So Journal of a Shut-In is like a little mini comic that I put together. It's pretty old now, but yeah, I'm definitely like an introvert by nature. Like I said, I've got some pretty close friendships, and I value those very highly, but I'm definitely not like going out meeting people. I mean, especially now, but even before pandemic stuff, I'm like very much a homebody, indoor cat kind of person. So that's where like stuff from Journal of a Shut-In comes in. And I think, and this is something that I have been thinking about more recently, that I do see that like putting a lot of the bold colors and movement and all that stuff into my illustration work is me trying to like make something more exciting than what I'm feeling inside. And just trying to like pump myself up and be like, oh yeah, we can make cool stuff. And, just that whole thing of like creating a world in your mind kind of thing to like get out of the doldrums of early February in Michigan or whatever it might be. Yeah. So, but there's definitely a lot of things that I feel excited about, and I love that energy and bright colors and all that kind of stuff. So I'm always like kind of wrestling with how to use that, but also represent some of the more like introverted qualities that I have. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be fun and like make some interesting artwork.
There's a certain way that you are giving back to Roper through your art. Mm-hmm. What motivates you to do that?
I mean, even though I only went there for 4 years, like I said, it was a good 4 years. And I think I went into it definitely like the more introverted kid sitting somewhere in a corner down in the basement, like drawing. And by the end of it, I felt like, I was definitely more sociable, like a new core group of friends, again, that I'm like still connected with, mm-hmm. which is great. Also, like I mentioned, like I met my wife at Roper. So I definitely think I gained a lot just by being there in terms of like friendships and connections and stuff. And also for me, it's definitely about the people. There are definitely things about the school and the history of the school and the education, the things that like George and Anne Marie brought when they created the school that I know have influenced me for the better. For me, it was more about the people that I met there, teachers and students. I thought that was like a great place to be. And I generally understood this idea of like lifelong learning and taking ownership over your education and your life and all this kind of stuff that have influenced me. So anyway, all that to say, I feel like I gained a lot from the school. So now it's nice to be asked to come back and create things that hopefully will be like long lasting for other people to get stuff out of. Like the website, I think is a very cool thing because especially me as a relatively younger student from the school and only being there for 4 years, there's a lot of the history that I don't know. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people like that too, current or past students, and just the general public. So that's a cool thing to be able to share. It's always nice to be trusted with representing the school too, in like a professional way. So like the logo, I thought that was a very cool project for that. But yeah, I just like working with these people who I know are like-minded and very open to creativity and ideas and all this kind of stuff. So it's always fun.
So what would you say, you can go back in time and you can talk to 17-year-old Jon. What do you say to 17-year-old Jon?
I'd probably be like, come on, stop living in your shell and like get out and don't be afraid of failure, rejection, all that kind of stuff that everybody probably says to their younger self. And I think definitely in terms of creativity, and I still struggle with this all the time, it should be the easiest thing in the world to just like draw or make whatever I want to make. Anything I want to do, I can just do it. But it's very hard to get over that initial fear of like, well, what if I make a thing and everybody hates it? What if I make a thing and nobody understands it? Why should I waste my time? And you can get really wrapped up in those kind of things in your own head, and it can stop creativity. So, and that's something I've struggled with forever, still do. So I think I could have nipped that in the bud a little bit more when I was 17. So it's like trusting your own creativity and your process and just making things that you want to make for yourself that make you feel good, and just knowing that somewhere out there, there's probably somebody else who that's going to connect with. So I think that would have been a good thing to have a better idea about back then.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming out today and
Sure.
having this conversation with me. And thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. It's great to talk to you. I should give a big shout out to Dave Clock, though. Dave Clock, class of 2002. He's a great friend, and he has helped me a lot get into the poster biz. So you probably won't use that, but I just have to put it in there somewhere.